What's up, everybody? And today we're checking out America's new tank is legitimately insane. This is by the legendary, the best channel on YouTube for informational military content, Task and Purpose, which if you're not subscribed, don't be silly. Go down, link below, go subscribe to their stuff. They're really, really good. Yeah, this is the M1A3 Abrams tank, and I don't know much about it. Obviously, for the past few months, I've been doing mostly aircraft videos, not many land-based vehicles. And so this is going to be super interesting. I don't really know anything about this tank, to be honest with you. It's a longer video, 23, 24 minutes. So sit back, get yourself a cup of tea, relax. Let's enjoy this. Let's learn some stuff. It's Task and Purpose. They're really, really good. They're going to give us some good information. It's going to be a bit funny. In fact, I think I've watched... How many Task and Purpose videos have I watched recently? I don't want to watch too much of their stuff and make them feel like I'm... well, the last one was the beginning of August, so they'll be okay. Anyway, yeah, I don't want to overload with Task and Purpose content, but they are the best channel for this type of stuff out there. Let's be honest. I typed in M1E3. Oh, if I was A3, M1E3 Abrams tank on YouTube, and like it's Task. Gotta go Task and Purpose, aren't you? You just gotta do it. Do we need to say anything before we get started? Check out morale, link down below. Check out all the links down below. I think that's all I've got to say. I think that's all I've got to say right now, guys. It's Friday. Relax, enjoy yourself. You might have just finished work. You might be chilling. You got the whole weekend ahead of you. Oh, beautiful times. Beautiful times.
The U.S. Army's next-generation M1E3 Abrams main battle tank is legitimately insane.
In the best way possible.
I dug up this list of proposed capabilities for the new design that include an autoloader, new main gun, new turret, hypersonic gun-launched missiles that maneuver in mid-air, the ability to pair with
Yo, what? They maneuver in mid-air?
robots, masking capabilities to reduce thermal and electromagnetic signatures, AI systems that detect incoming fire and prioritize return fire, hybrid electric drivetrain, reduction of crew from 4 to 3, reduction of weight from 75 tons down to sub 60 tons.
Wow.
But the coolest thing is it'll likely get a brand new sleek hull for the first time in 30 years. Now you know where all the rumors come from that I'm secretly attracted to main battle tanks.
What we're witnessing, I think, is U.S. Army leadership reversing course on decades of tank design philosophy to do a last-minute complete overhaul from the ground up based on new lessons learned from the war in Ukraine.
And I'm glad he touched on that then. I feel like if it wasn't for the war in Ukraine, I'd be like, why? We don't really need tanks these days. It's not really a current vehicle, is it? But the war in Ukraine shows that they are just as relevant now as they've ever been. Although I feel like it's strange, the US is in this very peculiar area where it's hard. It's going to be harder for them to move tanks to any other enemy. Obviously, if France or Germany had tanks, Ukraine had tanks, they just have to drive them to a certain spot, right? If war kicked off in Europe or in the East. Logistically, it's harder for America to get tanks over there, but at the same time, if any country could logistically manage it, it's America, isn't it?
In this episode, we're going to explore how these changes might affect the future of tank warfare, what new tactics the M1E3 Abrams will allow for, and will people ever stop saying that tanks are obsolete? I'm your average infantryman, Chris Cappy. Hit the like and subscribe button and let's find out.
Well, I literally just said that. I thought before the war in Ukraine that it would have been obsolete, but obviously that's not the case. I'm going to skip this ad real quick.
Link in the description to compare free life insurance quotes from top companies and see how much you could save today. Let's first start with the things that go boom. The new M1E3 has some serious firepower upgrades proposed for it, the most surprising of which I think is a recommendation that has a potential development of a gun-launched anti-tank guided missile. Russian tanks have had the capability to fire tank cannon-guided missile rounds since the 1970s.
Oh, wow.
But most Western tanks do not.
Why is that? There are a number of reasons. One is that some Soviet tank cannons weren't able to get long enough range and accuracy compared to their NATO counterparts. Soviet tank designers wanted to be able to hit helicopters at long ranges too with these missiles, and the United States did develop two separate tank-launched missiles, but they canceled the first one in the 1990s. The reason for this is because sensors at the time couldn't accurately identify targets out past 5 kilometers range. It was also canceled because of
Again, just like our aircraft videos we've been watching recently, it's all about the technology and if the technology can catch up to what we actually need it to do.
some offensive tweets it made about Chinese tanks years ago. However, I was shocked to learn that in one test, a US Abrams fired a prototype missile from the cannon and hit a moving T-72 tank at a range of 8,600 meters.
Oh my god!
We're talking, of course, about the XM943 tank round, or the Smart Target Activated Fire and Forget staff.
But the Army never invested in it to go full rate production. Part of the reason for this might be because it's also true that tank-launched ATGMs have a smaller warhead, and they don't perform as well against modern composite armor compared to the 1970s.
So why are they resurrecting this retro program?
Take a look at this US Army terrain analysis real quick. Army engineers went out into the field in Latvia and Lithuania. They used laser rangefinders to test how many points tanks would be able to fire 5 kilometers with a line of sight to a target. You're looking at the red circles of 25 different points that are scattered throughout Latvia and Lithuania border that they tested. The results were that there were actually numerous locations suitable for that long 5-kilometer range engagement that might make use of a tank-fired ATGM.
Again, it's so weird because tanks, to some extent, do feel relatively obsolete, don't they? But when you look at Ukraine and the war with Russia, they're definitely not. And so is that just a very unique war? Or does that just show that we have been blind to what regular war looks like because we've been fighting in Afghan and Iraq? Do you get what I'm saying? Like, not all wars are going to be like that. I think if the US and China started fighting, there probably wouldn't be much tank battles. But if the US and Russia were fighting with the help of Europe, there would be an ungodly amount. And so, yeah, I mean, I think it's wise for them to have a good tank, but it just shows that they were willing to wait. Like, it wasn't as much of a priority as it is to dominate the airspace.
However, training on tank-fired guided missiles would be difficult.
That's why I'm advocating that the U.S. Army invest in these training rigs
For our future warriors. Do it for the sake of our future warriors. Hua? Glenn Giorno, former 19-kilo M1 armor crewman at the U.S. Army, who was involved in the development of that anti-tank guided missile round, said, quote, "We could not find a way to implement and identify friendly or foe system that could not be exploited by a near-peer adversary. The projectile didn't care if you were a tank or an ambulance. Money was instead invested in making higher-resolution thermal sights for the M1A2, which can now have a 50x thermal sight. I even acquired some footage of one of those new anti-tank munitions being loaded up. Energy drinks are now mandatory, standard issue kit for every American M1A3 tank crew.
This suggests to us that new technologies developed since then and higher quality thermal optics could make cannon-launched missiles worth exploring again for the M1E3. However,
The new XM360 cannon and its ammo.
Why is it called M1E3, though? Why E? Maybe you'll explain it.
Could keep tank-fired ATGMs unnecessary for Western tanks. The gun actually has the same bore diameter of 120 millimeters that the M256 currently has equipped on the Abrams, but the new one uses composite barrel construction. It uses electrothermal chemical ignition to lower weight by a full ton while still adding punch. It's still in the experimental stage, but using ETC technology, a similar 120mm gun projectile was tested in 1990, and it had up to 17 megajoules of muzzle energy. Stop, I can only hua so hard, you guys. That's like the same amount of energy as a full-speed car crash to the teeth. It's about what a conventionally powered 140mm cannon could produce.
fellas, is my fixation on 120mm smoothbore cannons normal?
The current Abrams gun goes up to about 15 megajoules of muzzle energy. The way it works is it involves using an electric current to generate plasma, which then ignites the chemical propellant behind a projectile. This method allows for more precise control of the ignition process, resulting in higher velocities and improved accuracy and range for projectiles. It's like
Jesus.
supercharging the way a gun fires its ammo. It reminds me of like the hybrid 6.8mm ammo on the XM7 rifle. To ensure victory, the employment of a mass of tanks in a decisive direction with overwhelming firepower is essential.
Yeah, but that was during World War II. I feel like, I don't know, there's part of me that's like, how essential are they these days? But no, they are, aren't they? I'm just in denial because I was in the military during a time where tanks weren't necessary. You know what I mean? They are essential.
These three gentlemen you see here are the United States military's top decision makers responsible for the new Abrams. They're Brigadier General Joffrey Norman, the seasoned combat veteran of the crew, Major General Glenn Dean, the aerospace engineer, and Colonel Thompson, the strict yet fair deputy director of soldier lethality cross-functional teams. Now, they're the A-team of American tank design, with decades of experience between them, and seeing them work makes me want to say hua in the most unironic way. Working with them is a team of technicians in Eastern Europe who are in direct contact with Ukrainian tank crews to learn insights on how the Abrams is performing in high-intensity warfare.
That's
These
impressive.
insights then inform the direction of development. General Norman said, quote, "We appreciate the future battlefields."
That actually makes me have a bit of a quick question. What countries have the M1 tanks? They're being used in Ukraine. I didn't know that. Let me Google it real quick. List of battle tanks by country. I don't want to look through all this. Australia has the M1A1. For some reason, I thought it was mostly America. I mean, it's definitely going to be mostly America, isn't it? Let's be honest. But like, I just thought, so the Leopard tank obviously is very big. Canada uses the Leopard tank. Chile uses the Leopard tank. Let me have a look here. Denmark, Ecuador use that. There isn't actually... Oh, M1A1, where's this? Egypt uses the M1 tank. Interesting. France has their own. Obviously, Germany has... So maybe there isn't that many countries that actually use it. Iraq uses the M1 tank. Wait, what's this table here? Quantity and... Yeah. So Iraq uses it. Surprisingly, Israel does not. I thought they probably would. Yeah, I guess I'm surprised there isn't actually that many. Kuwait uses the M1. Or maybe this is just countries that have them in it, but don't necessarily have them for themselves. Morocco has the M1 and the... So the Morocco has the A1 and the A2. Interesting. That's very interesting. I'm just quickly like running through. A lot of countries have the German Abrams tank, which apparently is really good. Sorry, the Leopard tank. Poland has the M1 tank. We're getting near the end of the list here, guys. But I think this is a genuinely really interesting. Saudi Arabia has one. Has some. They don't have one. They have actually have 442 of them by the looks of it, according to Wikipedia. What else? Taiwan has two of them. Has two M1A2T Abrams. That's interesting. Just the two of them. I know this is probably taking longer than people appreciate, but I think it does give good context. There isn't that many countries that actually... What country is this? Ukraine has them. Yeah, so Ukraine has... They have a lot. They have a lot of the Leopard tanks. It looks like they have 31 M1 Abrams tanks. They also have 14 Challenger 2 tanks, which are the British ones for people unaware. Britain doesn't have any because they just have the Challenger ones. Challenger 2. The United States, apparently, according to Wikipedia, has 2,509 M1A1 and M1A2 tanks. And I think that's it. Yeah. So there isn't that many countries that actually have the M1. I think that was less than 10, maybe. And I don't know whether this list was if the countries own it or whether the US has a base in that country and has tanks in that country. And so they're different conversations right there, aren't there?
Pose new challenges to the tank as we study recent and ongoing conflicts. End quote.
Because the stakes are high here, right? The open source intelligence website Oryx claims that 14 of the 31 Abrams tanks have been knocked out so far.
This ultimately led to them being pulled from the front lines because of a number of reasons, including that they were too vulnerable to air attack and too heavy. They were reworked and sent back into the fight since then. And I know it's not a one-to-one comparison, but I think it does reveal some of the vulnerabilities of the old M1A1 Abrams that we're going to be seeing addressed here with this new model. According to General Norman, we anticipate having to change the crew configuration, potentially looking at opportunities to go to a remote turret or an optionally manned turret in order to save space under armor. So they're going to...
I don't know how I feel about a remote turret, though. Like, if you're driving that tank, what happens if you somehow lose comms or something and you can't... I don't know how I feel about remote turret. Are they talking about someone from external of the tank moving the turret? That would feel weird.
Link the new cannon to a remote-controlled, optionally manned turret. By switching to an autoloader and making the turret interior smaller, that's a lot less volume that has to be protected by heavy armor, which equates to a lot less tons of armor. Chat, what do you guys think of that? So interestingly, the new cannon wouldn't be manually loaded. It would be fed by an autoloader, like a machine that automatically loads the new rounds up next. That doesn't mean that its ammo would explode like the T-72 series of autoloaded tanks, though. Newly designed autoloading tanks can have all of their ammo secured behind a bulkhead blast shield and can work with blowout panels to prevent detonation from cooking the crew.
At what point do we just make these tanks completely unmanned, though? And they're just all remote control and there's no crew in them whatsoever? Because if the turret is remote controlled, the only thing that's controlled at that point is what? The driver and maybe a spotter and maybe a tech or something? Like, it feels a bit like, why not just go full remote control at this point?
Depends on how they choose to design it. If all or most of the crew are in a separate compartment down in the hull, the turret itself could act as a barrier between the crew and the ammo.
Yeah.
We've also seen from combat in Ukraine that the Abrams engine deck, with its air intakes and radiators, is a popular target point for drone swarms. So the Army's looking at unique ways.
Can we just fathom that we're talking about drone swarms attacking tanks? Oh my god, we literally are in the future, aren't we?
To keep the engine better protected from above without sacrificing cooling performance. The new M1E3 Abrams tank would also upgrade from that puny 50 caliber machine gun to possibly the 30mm chain gun remote weapon station.
Wow.
The big advantage there is that it could fire specially made 30 mics that provide air burst capability for shooting down drones. Organic to the vehicle air defense.
That's a good idea, but it's got to be very smart to do something like that.
Firepower increase makes the hairs on my cock broom stand at attention. I heard all the good 19 kilos have nice mustaches. The tank, like the airplane, may be said to be the answer to the prayers of the modern infantryman. One of the most important things you need to know about new tanks is that in the past, when the Army decided to upgrade a tank, they didn't design a whole new tank hull from scratch. Instead, they took an existing one from the roughly 2,500 already in service and then modified it, or they would grab from one of the 3,700 retired husks, collecting dust and storage.
Oh my god,
Many
look
of
at
those
that.
are located in California, in the desert, out in the middle of nowhere at the Sierra Army Depot. The old Abrams is then transported by rail to a facility to have a complete makeover, being refurbished and upgraded. Are you tired of your old clunky main battle tank? It's time to upgrade your ride. Introducing the M1A2 SEP V3 Abrams. Because why park when you can create your own parking lot? Every decade, the Army rolls out a new systems enhancement package. So come on down and settle for one of our refurbished year 2000 SEP V1. Or how about a 2010 V2? Or even a 2020 SEP V3 Abrams? We've gutted the old beasts and replaced everything. Communications, GPS, thermal imaging, fire control, you name it.
I mean, the fact that they can do that is pretty impressive to show how adaptable this vehicle is, though, isn't it? That's pretty amazing.
We got it. We kept the classic hull and turret that you've known to love about the Abrams because it's the opposite of planned obsolescence. It's maximum efficiency. Also, it saves you millions of dollars. Yeah,
True.
It costs $24 million each, but no one can get mad at you for buying it because now you have a fucking tank. We have to remember that systems enhancement packages was always supposed to be a stopgap, temporary band-aid solution for the Abrams because the service thought that they would do with that until a full replacement vehicle was chosen. That's how we ended up with like a dozen different variants of Abrams tanks with various levels of advanced features. In the early 2000s, the XM-1202 mounted combat system was supposed to replace all the Abrams, but funding for the program was cut in 2009, a trend that would continue because starting in 2013, the public and Army leadership started to question why we even had tanks in the first place. I mean, they're pretty damn expensive.
This is the conversation, but I think it was because we were in Iraq and Afghan. And there just wasn't a use case for him, was there?
Expensive, and you rarely need them in a fight against enemy insurgents. So in 2013, the military closed their M1 Abrams factory in Ohio to save $1 billion. The problem is, we lost hundreds of skilled tank engineers, and it cost a ton to get the assembly line back in action.
Yeah.
But the factory was reopened in 2017 with funding that breathed new life into the Abrams tank development. The cost to upgrade 165 Abrams to the SEP V3 is around $1.75 billion. That's actually relatively cheap in defense dollars.
It is, though. That is actually relatively cheap, isn't it? Even though it's crazy money.
By not requiring brand new hulls or turrets to be fabricated.
Wow.
The main difference between the M1, A1, and A2 is its electronics. However, with this new M1, A3, it's now likely to have a whole brand new hull and turret. There's conflicting reports on that, but I can't see any other way that we get the kind of weight reductions that they're looking for without a whole new hull with different types of composite armor.
He's definitely right there, but at the same time, if they create a whole new hull, firstly, it's going to be way more expensive than just upgrading, like he's been saying. But I hope that if they do it, that the hull is just as adaptable as the previous one, and it's something that will be around for a long, long time and can be adapted. That's what you want to see, isn't it? And if anything, if wars go in the direction I think they're going to be, where it's all going to be unmanned and it's all going to be from the air and all this other stuff, drones and all that lot, this might be the last hull they'll ever make. In all truth. Because it could all change to just being all air power, you know? You never know, do you?
That's part of the reason why the M1E3 is so big of a deal.
Is it just me, or does that new hull look really good? That is, oof, that is one nice looking hull.
It's kind of
Better not
cool.
awaken anything in me.
In 2023, the Army shocked the entire defense world when they decided to cancel plans for the System Enhancement Package version 4. The first version of the Abrams tank weighed 54 tons. SEP V4 that was canceled was on track to weigh over 75 tons.
Oh my God.
Add in a mine plow, and it was going to break the scales at 83 tons.
Oh my
the M1A3
God.
that we're talking about is going to try to be under 60 tons for reasons that we'll get into. But how do you make a multi-billion-dollar decision like that? A choice that will affect thousands of soldiers, a decision that will ultimately decide whether future warriors will have the best equipment or not. The defense industry can be an opaque bureaucratic nightmare. The inner workings and the bowels of defense procurement can be a mystery, even for those who work in it. But in this case, I think it's important to understand that. According to a congressional research report, it was an Army Science Board study from 2019 that convinced these three key decision makers that we mentioned in the beginning of the video to develop the brand new M1E3. Now, what is the Army Science Board? It provides the military with world-class scientists, engineers, business and policy experts from the private sector and academia. That quiet engineering professor you had at Sarah Lawrence is moonlighting as a consultant for the Army, helping obliterate people halfway around the world. In May 2020,
It's funny because it's true.
the first contract for a preliminary design went out to General Dynamics Land Systems based on the requirements from the Army Science Board. The over 200 consultants have been in the background and unseen. They're a rarely heard influence
Wow.
guiding U.S. Army procurement. They wield considerable power and are responsible for some of the most effective weapon systems since the Korean War. I
Wow.
went to the Army Science Board website to see if I could dig up any information on that report. I thought there's absolutely no way that this information is easily searchable for an idiot like myself, and yet there it was, all easily searchable. Quote, the M1A2 SEP 3 and 4 upgrades will improve effectiveness but not restore dominance. Near transparency in all domains will significantly increase the lethality our forces will experience. We will continue to have to fight outnumbered, exacerbated by a low MBT operational readiness rate and aging fleet.
So I think this goes along with what I was saying about what aircraft was it I was saying about basically how it might have been one of the bombers, or maybe it was that fancy one that's crazy fast, the radar one. But the point I was trying to get across is there are other countries who are making advancements in aerospace, right? And although their advancements that they're making right now, in fact, it was the video about the F-22 Super. Even though these other countries are making incredible advancements, China and Russia, on these aircraft, they're not even close to the F-22. And yet still the American military complex is like, well, we want to make the F-20. We still want to keep that gap as big as it is from the other countries. And I think all this is doing that same thing. They are well aware that the M1 tank is old. It's old, and it's been a great servant to the country, to many countries, but there's only so much it can do. And to say that it's lasted this long with this many iterations is a success. Like, that is a great success. But if you want to stay that one step ahead of every other country, and we've seen the M1 being used in Ukraine right now, and we know it's not the best one out there, they need to do a new one. If the US wants to keep that one step ahead, and even if you think that tanks are obsolete, it's still important for the US to assert dominance by being that one step ahead in every aspect. Every aspect. And if they're ahead in every single aspect, then they're not gonna be worried about any gaps in their military. That's the way it is.
Science Board study influenced senior Army leadership to go in a new direction, recommending a $2.9 billion, 7.5-year-long program to develop a whole new tank. If you skim through the document, I think it's really interesting to note that they believe their main competition was the Russian T-14 back in 2019, which they mentioned 14 times throughout the document. Some of the most influential people in the U.S. Army weapons development R&D teams thought that the Russian T-14 tank was a potential real threat, and were developing these insane new systems to counter its claimed abilities. The Army Science Board also recommended a whole new chassis in the documents. General Glenn Dean said, quote, the Abrams tank can no longer grow its capabilities without adding weight, and we need to reduce its logistical footprint.
Yeah.
The war in Ukraine has highlighted a critical need for integrated protections for soldiers, built from within instead of adding on.
Luckily, and you can say this from a selfish standpoint of an American, because I am an American, and so I want America to thrive in the military. The war in Ukraine has highlighted a vulnerability of the US's military, and that is the tank. We know that. Look at the gap between the F-35 and the F-22, and then Russia and China's aircraft. The gap is like generations, but with the tanks, it's not. And so the US really needs to be like, again, like I was just saying earlier, even if people think the tanks are obsolete, that gap needs to be there. There can't be any kink in the armor of the gap between our military and our adversaries' military. And if it costs a couple of extra billion, which is a lot of money, but to the military, it's not that much. If it costs that much to have that gap and prevent a vulnerability, it just seems like a no-brainer, doesn't it? It really does.
Take a look at the Army Science Board unclassified chart here. You can pause it if you want to read the full breakdown of the Abrams weight components, but I think the thing to pay attention to here is that 50% of the Abrams weight is its armor. 15 tons is dedicated to the turret structure. They can save a lot of weight there with new production techniques like 3D metal printed hulls and computer-assisted designs. Brigadier General Norman said, quote, we are consistently looking at ways to drive down the made battle tank's weight to increase our operational mobility and ensure we can present multiple dilemmas to the adversary by being unpredictable in where we can go and how we can get there. One of the lessons learned in Ukraine is that tanks are sometimes dead meat if they're too heavy. They get stuck in the mud, they're too slow, not nimble enough to fire, and then escape from drones that are searching for them becomes impossible. Heavy tanks also limit the amount of locations that you can attack from. This makes your movement more predictable to the enemy. Evidence for this, and where I think the general's quote is coming from, is from the Army Science Board study. I put the link in the description if you want to follow along Barney style.
God, let's appreciate task and purpose here. They're like, if you want to see it, the study, it's down below. The amount of work I don't know whether it's just him or whether it's a team of people. The amount of work they put into these videos is phenomenal. Like, it's so impressive. I don't know if it's just the one guy that does it or whether it's a whole team. But my God. This is the Instagram. The Instagram's just his Instagram. And so I don't know whether it is just him or not, but geez, like the amount of work he puts into these videos is insane.
But what you're looking at right now is the border between Latvia and Lithuania again. This is a terrain analysis performed by U.S. Army engineers of the Abrams mobility over wet and dry terrain. The first image shows us the dry season. Everything in green that you're looking at right now is where Abrams can move unrestricted. The second image, though, shows us the wet season. Now, everything that you're looking at in red shows us where the Abrams movement would be restricted.
And yeah, if you're in a war and the enemy has that map, oh my God, look at all this space here that the enemy can utilize, even getting around and maneuvering around places where you're able to go. Wow, that's massive.
They couldn't move at all or below 16 kilometers per hour. Unless you're colorblind, you can see mostly everything is in red here. The study points out that this means, from a tactical perspective, a defending force could easily mine trafficable routes, destroy bridges, to complicate Abrams combat operations during the wet season and funnel them into choke points. The reason for this has to do with the ground pressure of the tanks. Because of this, the study recommends new band tracks to lower the ground pressure to help fix that problem, along with the lighter weight. You might think, okay, yeah, but it's a tank that's supposed to be heavy. But there are increasing costs to fielding a tank as it gets heavier. For one, heavier weight reduces fuel economy. By the time the SEP V3 rolled around, the operational range had dropped from 300 miles down to 264 miles.
Which is a substantial amount if you think about it. 40 miles is a lot.
That means the Abrams burns between 1.5 and 3 gallons per mile. You heard me right. Gallons per mile, not miles per gallon. The tank was originally invented to clear a way for the infantry in the teeth of machine gun fire. Now it is the infantry who will have to clear a way for the tanks. Churchill's quote is as true then as it is today. Here's how trusty FM3-0 explains the role of the M1E3 tank. This is an actual quote. FM3-0, it's like the U.S. Army Operations Combat Bible. But they say infantry protects tanks from enemy infantry and anti-tank systems, while tanks provide mobile protected firepower for the infantry.
Yeah, it's an ecosystem of both of them working together, isn't it?
Ground maneuver can make enemy forces displace and become vulnerable to joint fires, while joint fires can disrupt enemy reserves and command and control to enable operations on the ground. General Norman, I follow you on X. If you're open to signing my copy of FM3-0, you can message me on my X or Instagram at CappyArmy. Links in the description. The Army Science Board points out how much of a hidden pain it is to get the Abrams to the fight.
I hope that actually happens. I hope he does get it signed. That would be hilarious.
Is on limited number of British transport HETs, which are like giant tractor trailers. All I know is I wouldn't want to be an E3 stuck ground guiding that thing in reverse, helping to park that. In fact, American Transportation Command, Transcom, issued a statement that concluded, quote, the M1A2 SEP V3 cannot achieve transportable approval at this time.
That's
meaning
not good.
That Transcom isn't willing to go out of their way and say that they approve of this vehicle for transportation wide scale.
Yeah.
Anyone who has served in an armored unit knows how vehicles need to be towed often and then be recovered, even if they just break down. So it would take 2 M88 recovery vehicles to tow a SEP V3. The study found that the mean time between failures for the current Abrams was approximately 200 miles, which poses problems for extended operations. All of this is to say, we needed a redesign to solve these growing problems.
Yeah, it's just a case of they need to go back to the drawing board and legitimately think, all right, we can put extra money in now, and in the long term, we're going to have not just a better tank, but if you have one better vehicle, the ecosystem around that, the sphere of influence that vehicle has on the people who look after it, the people who maintain it, the people who have to recover it, the people who work with it, vastly changes, doesn't it? And so it's kind of it would probably save them money in the long run, wouldn't it? If you think about it.
So the M1A3 will be a combination of technologies from the canceled CEP V4 and the Abrams X prototype. It'll likely have the hybrid electric drivetrain that reduces fuel consumption by 50%, making it like the Prius of tanks, the hybrid power pack of the Abrams X, which may be incorporated into the M1A3, and it looks promising. With its greater efficiency, this could help reduce the signature of the tank to make it more stealthy. Its silent watch capabilities will be a huge plus, allowing you to monitor the battlefield without drawing attention to your location.
Why are they making this Abrams advert like an Apple one?
General Norman confirmed active protection is a requirement for the M1A3, saying, quote, "That's part and parcel to the vehicle survivability, profile, and design. That's one of the things that we know absolutely we will integrate into the program." Recent experience in the Israeli-Hamas conflict shows that the trophy system isn't the greatest at tackling cheap and plentiful drone drop munitions or FPV attacks, because current versions are limited to a 55-degree elevation. Trophy uses fairly large and powerful projectiles to counter threats too, which is less than ideal against swarms of drones that might attack a vehicle multiple times in a short time span.
Yeah.
It's not only overkill, but it limits the number of charges the system can carry. My belief, based on reading these documents and listening to interviews with the key Army leadership about the Abrams tank, is that the future of armored warfare in the Army, the way the Army envisions it, is that they'll be preparing for a major change to tank tactics unlike anything we've seen since the introduction of the Abrams in 1980.
And I think that's long overdue, isn't it? Let's be honest.
Warrior Maven interviewed William Nelson, Deputy Commander, Army Futures Command, and he says that this running theme that I've seen throughout all these talks, where he says they all seem to believe that the future will be a combination of manned and unmanned platforms that are integrated with aerial UAVs. The M1A3 is the first step in that direction. The Army plans to adopt and start fielding the eventual M1A3 by the early 2030s.
So at least in 5 years' time then, which I think is probably quite a relatively quick time scale for something like this, for something as big of a project as this, because if you think about not just building the tank, right? But think about the personnel that need to be trained on it, the people who need to maintain it. All of them have to be educated like really, really well. The people driving it need to learn how to drive it just as well as they're driving the M1. There's a lot to it than what meets the eye, isn't there?
While defense acquisition projects always run into cost overruns and delays, the fact that General Dynamics already did that much legwork on the Abrams X tech demonstrator might iron out some of the few road bumps along the way. So here's hoping we see a production version of the M1A3, what it'll be named after the M1E3, rolls off the assembly line, blasting through the enemy instead of blasting through billions of taxpayer dollars before being canceled 2 years later now.
True.
So look, I'm your average infantryman, Chris Cappy. I hope you liked this video, and I'll see you guys again.
He ended his video
The
quick
US
there. Chris, I don't know whether he probably doesn't watch this video of me. If you're watching it and you want to clip it and send it to him because his videos are phenomenal. I don't know whether he has a team behind the information here, but the amount of informational content he has in a 20-minute video about this tank is phenomenal. And he's putting out videos every couple of days. He must have a team behind him because that is incredibly impressive. It must have a team behind him doing this. But still, there's only one thing I would love to have added to these videos, which is crazy considering how good they are, and I'm being a bit selfish probably in saying this, is I wish he dedicated like 2 or 3 minutes at the end of his videos for his personal opinion, just a straight up personal piece of being like, or maybe even if it's a team of people, having their personal thoughts, because he has now made hundreds of videos on all sorts of different subjects in the military, and he's a veteran, so we know he has a good understanding. Just like me, I have a good understanding of the basics of military the military world, let's just say. And so having someone like that give their personal opinion, I think, is incredibly valuable to people who don't really have that much of an expertise in that field, right? So we've done videos on, there's one here on the F-16, there's one here on other aircraft, here's one on the F-14. Like, I was a Royal Marines commander, right? I earned a Green Beret. I wasn't touching aircraft. And so having someone else's opinion can definitely help with my thought process on something like that. I think if he added that onto the end, like, and I'm being selfish because his videos are pretty damn perfect, let's be honest. But yeah, I am always absolutely blown away of how good Task and Purpose are on YouTube. They're phenomenal. Chris Cappy is a former US Army infantry and Iraq veteran. I cover geopolitics, history, weapon systems, and all things military related. I do this from a veteran perspective. Join the Discord. Link down below to their videos. Absolutely phenomenal. They always are. Great video. I'd love to know what you think about this. I think this is the best way to go. I think that, again, even though tanks aren't necessarily as important as they used to be, I think that it's important that the US just stays that one step ahead, just like it's doing with aircraft, just like it's doing in the ocean, everywhere, just like it's doing with the weapon systems of what the infantry are carrying with this new SIG rifle, which I'd love to get my hands on. I think it's so cool. And as someone who, yes, I am British, I grew up in Britain, I live in Britain right now, but I am an American citizen. I want to make sure the US is one step ahead. Not only because I am a US citizen, but because my British family, we're practically siblings with America. If Britain kicks off with someone, America's there. If America kicks off with someone, Britain's there. We're practically one nation in that aspect, and so we want to grow together. We want to grow together as a big brotherhood. Rant done. Have a great weekend. I love you all, and I'll see you in the next video. Take it easy. Goodbye.